I have been standing outside palaces for 11 years now, and I can tell you something most people will never believe. The schedules are alive. Not the paper ones, not the printed rotations they hand us every Sunday evening in the briefing room. I mean the real schedule, the one underneath, the one that breathes. My name is Corporal Edwin Marsh. I serve in the Queen's Guard, though I should say the King's Guard now, because the world keeps changing whether you want it to or not. I am 34 years old. I have a daughter named Pippa who is 6. I have a wife named Hannah who used to laugh at my jokes and now mostly looks tired when I come home. And until last spring, I thought I was the most ordinary soldier in the regiment. Then I noticed the pattern. I want to tell you exactly how it started, because I think the small details matter. People always want the big moments, the dramatic ones, the moments where someone shouts or cries or falls to their knees. But the real things in life start quietly. They start on a Tuesday morning when you are tying your boots and thinking about nothing in particular. It was March, late March, that strange week when London cannot decide if it is still winter. The cherry trees near St. James's Park had started to bud, but the wind was still mean. I remember pulling my bearskin lower because the cold kept finding my ears. I remember the smell of the wet stone in the courtyard. I remember the way my breath made small clouds when I exhaled, and how Sergeant Halloway laughed at something Private Doyle said, and how the laugh sounded too loud in the morning air. That was the morning I felt it for the first time. A heaviness, not in my body, somewhere else. A heaviness that arrived without warning and settled across my shoulders like an old coat I had forgotten I owned. I knew that heaviness. I had felt it before. The strange thing was, I felt it on the same week every year. Late March. Always late March. I did not know why. Let me back up. When you stand guard, your mind goes places. People think we are blank, that we are statues, that nothing happens inside the uniform. They are wrong. Inside the uniform, a whole life is happening. You think about your mortgage. You think about your father who died when you were 19, and how he would have looked at you in the bearskin and pretended not to be proud while being very proud. You think about whether you remembered to take the chicken out of the freezer. And sometimes, if you have been standing long enough, in enough weather, in enough silence, you start to notice things other people do not notice. The tourists come in waves. There is a morning wave, a lunch wave, and an evening wave. The lunch wave is loudest. They eat sandwiches against the railings and drop crumbs that the pigeons clean up before the inspectors arrive. There is always one child who runs at you on a dare. There is always one teenager who tries to make you laugh. There is always one elderly woman who looks at you the way she might look at a son who has gone away to war. The cars come too. Black cars, silver cars, sometimes a Bentley, sometimes a Range Rover, sometimes one of the older ones with the special plates. You learn to recognize them by their sound, the way the tires murmur against the cobbles, the way the engines idle. After a few years, you can tell who is inside without looking. And the routines, oh, the routines. The royal family operates on a calendar that is older than any of us. It runs on tradition the way a clock runs on a spring. There are public engagements, of course, the ones in the newspapers, but there are also the quieter ones, the private movements, the visits to certain rooms on certain days, the way the lights come on in certain windows at certain times. You see all of this when you stand still long enough. I had been seeing it for years, but I had never connected it to myself until that March morning. I went home that evening, and I was quiet at the table. Hannah noticed. She always notices. She put down her fork and she looked at me and she said, "Edwin, what is it?" She did not say it like a question. She said it like a fact she already knew. I shrugged. I told her I was tired. I told her the wind had been bad. I told her Pippa's school had sent another note about something or other and I would deal with it tomorrow. I told her everything except the truth, which was that I felt the heaviness, and I did not know where it came from, and it scared me a little because it kept arriving on time. She nodded. She has learned over the years that I will say things when I am ready and not before, She is a patient woman, more patient than I deserve. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed and I listened to the radiator clicking. I listened to Pippa's small sleeping sounds through the wall. I listened to a fox barking somewhere down the street, the way foxes do in London, sounding more like ghosts than animals. And I thought about the heaviness. I thought about when I had felt it before. I am not the kind of man who writes things down. I have always been suspicious of journals. They feel like something other people do, people with more time and softer hands. But that night I got up and I found an old notebook in the kitchen drawer, the one Hannah used for grocery lists, and I sat at the table in my pajamas and I started writing dates. Late March, heaviness. Mid-June, the other thing, the restless thing where I cannot sit still and my hands keep moving. First week of September, sadness, a specific kind like missing someone you have not lost. Late November, the cold one, not the cold of the weather, the cold inside. I sat there for a long time looking at those 4 entries. I had felt these things every year for as long as I could remember. I had never put them in a row before. And then I did something strange. I started writing down royal events next to them, things I had observed during those weeks, things I had stood through. Late March, the private memorial, the one at the small chapel, every year in the same week. A car arrives at 7 in the morning and stays for 40 minutes and leaves before the press wakes up. Mid-June, trooping the color preparations, the drills, the horses, the energy in the courtyard that builds for weeks before the actual ceremony. First week of September, the return from Balmoral, the household readjusting, the quiet that always settles before the autumn engagements begin. Late November, the annual visit to the cemetery near Frogmore, the one almost no one writes about, the flowers brought in the dark. I stared at the notebook. The dates matched. Every single one of them matched. I did not know what to do with that information. For a few days I did nothing. I went to work. I stood my watches. I came home. I helped Pippa with her reading. I made small talk with Hannah about whether we should visit her sister in Brighton in the summer. I tried to pretend I had not noticed anything. But you cannot unnotice a thing like that. It followed me. On every shift, I found myself listening for the cars, watching the lights in the windows, counting the steps of the changing routine and timing them against the small clock in my chest, the one that had been keeping pace with all of this without my permission. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself a man who stands in one place for hours will find patterns in anything. I told myself I was tired and the wind was bad, and I had been reading too many of Pippa's library books about ancient gods and constellations. But then April came, and something happened that made me realize I was not imagining anything. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Pippa had a school play that evening, and I had been thinking about it all day, trying to get home in time to see her be a tree. I was on the morning shift at the side gate. There was a light rain, the kind that does not quite commit to being rain, more of a thinking about rain. The tourists were thinner because of the weather. A couple of Italian students were taking photos near the railing. A man in a wax jacket was walking a small dog along the pavement. Nothing remarkable. Then a car came through the gate. It was one of the quiet cars, not a flashy one. A dark green Jaguar with mud on the wheels, the kind of car that has been somewhere outside London recently. The driver was an older man I had seen before. In the back seat I could just make out a figure, a woman, looking out of the window with the kind of expression people only wear when they think no one is watching. She looked sad. Not dramatically sad. Not the sadness of news cameras in crisis. A small, specific sadness. The kind that lives in the corners of someone's mouth and makes the eyes seem a little further away than usual. And as the car passed, I felt it. The exact same feeling. Not similar, not related. The exact same feeling I had been carrying for 2 weeks, the heaviness, the late March weight. I felt it move through me as the car moved past me. I felt it like a frequency, like one tuning fork answering another. I almost lost my composure. You are trained in the Guard to hold yourself together no matter what passes in front of you. You learn to keep your face still while crying children scream at you, while drunk tourists shout in your ear, while pigeons land on your bearskin. But that morning, I felt my throat tighten in a way it never had before. I felt my hands want to move. I had to look at a point on the wall across the courtyard and breathe very slowly and remind myself who I was and where I was, and what I was paid to do. The car drove on. The figure in the back seat did not look at me. She had no reason to. But I knew in that moment that whatever I had been feeling for years was not random. It was tied to something, tied to someone, tied to a calendar I had never been given but had somehow been keeping time with anyway. I went home that night, and I missed the school play. Pippa cried. Hannah was furious. I tried to explain that the trains had been delayed, that there had been an issue at the gate, that I had been held over. None of it was true. The truth was that after my shift I had walked. I had walked for 3 hours through London in the rain, from the palace down past Westminster, along the river, across the bridge, back up through Lambeth, in circles, in spirals, trying to make sense of what I had felt. Hannah did not speak to me for the rest of the evening. I sat on the edge of Pippa's bed after she had finally gone to sleep, and I watched her face in the orange glow of the night light, and I thought about how strange it was that a man could love his daughter this much and still be so far away from her on the night she needed him. I thought about the woman in the car. I thought about how she had looked. I thought about how I had felt the same thing she was feeling, somehow, across the gate, across the rain, across whatever distance is supposed to separate a man like me from a person like her. And I made a decision. I decided I was going to find out what I was tracking, quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. I was not going to invade anyone's privacy. I was not going to ask questions I had no right to ask, but I was going to pay attention, the way I had always paid attention, and I was going to write it all down. Because if my body was keeping a calendar that belonged to someone else, I wanted to know whose calendar it was. And I wanted to know why. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work, I stood my watches, I did my job the way I always had. But underneath the uniform, something had shifted. I was listening differently, watching differently. Every car, every footstep, every light in every window, I was taking notes in my head. I started to see things I had missed for years. The way the household staff moved in different rhythms on different days. The way one particular window on the second floor of one of the side buildings had its curtains opened earlier on certain mornings. The way certain bouquets arrived from certain florists during certain weeks. The way a specific senior member of staff, a woman with gray hair and a sensible coat, walked through the courtyard every Tuesday at the same time carrying the same kind of folder. I started to understand that the palace was not one calendar but many. It was overlapping rhythms. It was a great machine of small habits, each one fitted to a person, each person fitted to a season, the seasons fitted to a year, the year fitted to a tradition stretching back further than anyone alive could remember. And inside all of that somehow was a thread that connected to me. I wrote in my notebook every night. Hannah saw me doing it once and she raised an eyebrow, but she did not ask. I think she was relieved. I think she thought I had found a hobby, a man's hobby, something to keep me busy. She did not know I was writing about her at all. She did not know I was writing about a woman in a car in the rain and what her sadness had felt like passing through my body. I would not have known how to explain it. How do you tell your wife that you have started feeling things at the same time as the royal family? How do you tell her that? How do you tell anyone? You do not. You keep writing in the notebook. You keep watching. You keep waiting. May came. The weather warmed. The cherry trees finished their show and the lavender started in the parks, and the tourists got bolder, taking more photos, getting closer to the line we are supposed to make them stay behind. In the second week of May, I felt something new. It was not one of my four feelings. Not the heaviness, not the restless, not the missing someone, not the cold. It was something I had not felt before. A small lifting in the chest. A quiet hope. The way it feels when you walk into a room and realize the person you wanted to see is already there. I wrote it down. I dated it. I did not know what to call it. The next morning I read in the paper that a member of the royal family had returned to public duty after a long private illness. The first official engagement in months. A smile in the photograph. The smallest, most cautious smile, but real. I closed the paper, and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Hannah came in and asked if I wanted toast. I said yes. I did not tell her what I was thinking, which was that the feeling in my chest the night before had not been mine. It had been a borrowed feeling. A feeling that had drifted across whatever invisible wire connects one human being to another, when both of them are standing inside the same old machine of duty and history and bearskin hats and quiet morning cars. I did not believe in any of this. That is the thing I want you to understand. I am a soldier. I'm not a man who reads about psychic frequencies or moon charts or whatever you want to call this. I'm a man who shines his boots every night and pays his bills on time and takes his daughter to football practice on Saturdays. If you had told me a year before that I would be sitting in my kitchen wondering whether I had felt a royal smile from the inside, I would have laughed in your face and offered you another cup of tea. But there I was, eating my toast, trying to understand what was happening to me. I want to tell you about the day I almost broke. It was the end of May. The weather had turned beautiful. London was at its best, the parks full of people lying on the grass, the streets warm with that particular yellow light that only happens for 2 weeks a year before the summer gets too thick. I was on the changing of the guard, the full ceremony, bearskin hat, full kit, the works. A large crowd had gathered. They always do in late May. There were schoolchildren in matching shirts being herded by tired teachers. There were Japanese tourists with cameras the size of toasters. There were 3 Americans loudly explaining the ceremony to each other incorrectly. There was a young couple holding hands and looking at the palace as if they had wandered into a fairy tale. And then there was the boy. He was maybe 9 or 10. Brown hair, slightly too long, sticking out from under a baseball cap. He was standing near the front of the crowd with what I assumed was his mother. He was not laughing or pointing or trying to make me flinch. He was just looking at me the way Pippa sometimes looks at me when she has a question she is afraid to ask. I should not have looked back. You are not supposed to look back. You are supposed to look through. You learn to make your eyes go a little soft, a little far away, so that the people in front of you become shapes rather than people, so that you can stand for hours without the world climbing into you. But I looked at him, and as I looked at him, I felt a feeling rise in my chest that I cannot really describe. It was not one of my 4. It was not the May lifting. It was something rawer, something private. A feeling like coming home after a long day and finding that the lights are on and someone has been waiting for you and you did not know how much you needed that until exactly that moment. I felt my eyes go wet. In uniform, in front of a crowd, in the middle of the changing of the guard. I have never been so close to losing my composure in my entire career. I forced my eyes forward. I made my mind go blank. I did the breathing the trainers had taught us, the slow count, the locking of the jaw, the imagining of stones. I got through the rest of the ceremony. No one noticed. The crowd took their photos and moved on. The boy disappeared. But when I walked back through the gate to the barracks afterwards, my hands were shaking. That night I sat in my notebook for 2 hours. I tried to work out what had happened, who the boy was, whether he was anyone in particular, whether he had any connection to the family I had been quietly tracking. I had no way of knowing. He might have been any boy in any crowd. But the feeling had been so specific. Coming home, lights on, someone waiting. I wrote those words down. And then I wrote a question underneath them, in slightly shaky handwriting that did not look like mine. Whose feeling is this? I sat there looking at the question for a long time. Eventually, Hannah came in and put her hand on my shoulder. She did not say anything. She just stood there for a minute, her hand on my shoulder, the way she used to before the years got hard and we both got tired and we forgot how to do small things like that. I reached up and put my hand on hers. She squeezed. She said, "Whatever it is, Edwin, I am here." I almost told her then. I almost told her everything. But I did not, because I did not have the words yet, because the story was still arranging itself inside me, the way a sky arranges itself before a storm, and I did not want to speak too soon and frighten the shape away. I just squeezed her hand back, and I closed the notebook, and I went to bed. June arrived hot. I do not remember a June being that hot in London. The grass in the parks went brown in patches. The pigeons looked dazed. The tourists stopped wearing jackets and started wearing those small paper fans that vendors sell near the underground stations. The bearskin hat, which is heavy in any weather, became a private kind of punishment in the heat. But I was glad for June, because June was trooping, and trooping was when my restless feeling always arrived. I wanted to test it. I wanted to see if, this time, knowing what I now knew, I could feel it differently. I could pay closer attention. I could match it against the household, against the rehearsals, against the energy in the courtyards in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. So I watched, and I felt it arrive right on schedule. The first time was a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was off duty, walking back from the corner shop with a carton of milk for Hannah when the feeling moved through me. A buzzing in my hands, a want, without an object, the need to move, to do something, to be useful, to be in motion. I had felt it every June for as long as I could remember, and I had always blamed the weather, the longer days, the way light makes a person restless. I stopped on the pavement, and I stood there with my milk, and I waited. I let it pass through me. I tried to feel where it was coming from. It is hard to explain what I mean. I do not want to sound mad, but I have tried, since this whole thing started, to think of it the way a fisherman thinks of the sea. The sea is full of currents. You cannot see them, but you can feel them under your boat. A good fisherman learns to feel which current is the one that will take him home, and which is the one that will pull him out to nothing. The restless feeling that morning had a direction. It pointed toward the palace. I cannot tell you how I knew that. I just knew. The way you know which way is up when your eyes are closed. The way a horse knows the storm is coming. I walked home and I gave Hannah her milk, and I sat on the back step and I waited for the feeling to settle. It did, eventually, like a fly that has finally found a window. But it left a question behind it. If I could feel the direction of a feeling, what else could I learn? I started experimenting. I do not like that word, experimenting. It sounds clinical. It sounds like I was treating any of this as a game. I was not. I was treating it like a man treats a strange noise in his car engine. You do not ignore it. You do not panic. You listen carefully and you try to work out what it means. I started, when a feeling arrived, to note 3 things. The time, the direction, the texture. The texture was the hardest. How do you describe the texture of a feeling? But I tried. I would write things like sharp, like a coin under the tongue, or soft and damp, like an old sponge, or bright and itchy, like new wool. I knew these descriptions would make no sense to anyone else. They made sense to me. And slowly, over the weeks, I started to be able to recognize different feelings as belonging to different sources. I will not pretend I could name the people. I had no business knowing the names. But I started to feel with increasing certainty that there were several distinct rhythms moving through me, not just one. There was a deep, slow one like a tide. There was a quick, bright one like a kettle starting to boil. There was a thin, sad one that came and went without warning, like someone passing through a room and forgetting to close the door behind them. These felt like different people. Different rooms in the same great house, brushing against my back as I walked past. I do not know how to explain why I should have been the one to feel them. I have asked myself this many times. I am not special. I am not chosen. I am a corporal in a uniform with sore feet and a wife who deserves better and a daughter who is the best thing I have ever done. There is nothing about me that should make me more open to whatever wind was moving through me than any other man on the line. The only thing I can think of is the standing. The standing for hours, the standing for years, the standing in one place in one uniform in one role while the household moved past and around and through. Maybe if you stand still long enough, things start to settle on you. The way dust settles, the way moss settles on a stone. Maybe being still is a kind of listening, and I had been listening without knowing it for over a decade. There is a man in my regiment named Bertie Glass. He is older than me. He is going to retire next year. He has been in the Guard longer than any other man I know, and he has a face like an old leather wallet full of folds and quiet stories. He never talks much. He never volunteers anything, but he watches. One evening in mid-June, I was sitting in the small back room behind the mess where the older men go for their tea. I was nursing a cup, thinking too much. Bertie came in and sat down across from me without asking. He stirred his tea for a long time. Then he said in his low, slow voice, "You have been quiet, Marsh." I shrugged. I told him I was tired. He nodded. He stirred his tea some more. Then he said, "It happens to some of us. The longer you do it, things start to come through." I looked up at him. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the table. "Things," I said. "Things," he said. He took a slow sip of his tea. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. I understood all at once that he had felt something too, at some point, maybe long ago, maybe not so long, and that he had recognized whatever was happening to me without me having to say a word. I did not know whether to feel comforted or frightened. "What did you do?" I asked. He thought about it. "Mostly," he said, "I tried not to interfere. We are not meant to interfere. We are meant to stand." I sat with that. "Did it stop?" I said. He shook his head slowly. "It does not stop," he said. "You learn to carry it like the rifle, like the hat, like everything else." He finished his tea. He stood up. He clapped me on the shoulder once very briefly, and he walked out of the room. I sat there for a long time after he left. I had not been alone in this. Other men like Bertie, had stood where I stood and felt what I felt, and had carried it quietly into retirement and beyond, the way soldiers carry many things they never speak about. I was both more frightened and more steady than before. Trooping came. If you have never seen Trooping the Color, I cannot fully explain it to you. It is one of those things that looks small on a television screen and feels enormous in person. The color, the music, the horses, the precision, the crowds, the sense of history pressing down on every square inch of pavement. I was on the line that day. My position was not central. I was one of many. I had been part of troopings before, and I would be again. I knew my job. I knew where to look and where not to look. I knew how to make my body into a piece of architecture for a few hours. But that day was different. I could feel them. All of them. The whole family. The whole household. Every person on the balcony, every person in the procession, every person backstage waiting nervously for their cue. I could feel them the way you feel a crowded room with your eyes closed. Not by sight, by something else. Pressure, warmth, volume. And I could feel the one I had been quietly tracking since March. She was tired. I could feel her tiredness in my own legs. She was trying to be present, trying to smile, trying to keep her shoulders back. but underneath the smile she was somewhere else, a long way away. I do not know where. I do not need to know. I just knew, the way you know when your wife is pretending she is fine and is actually thinking about her mother. And then, somewhere across the parade ground, I felt the boy. The same boy. The one from the changing of the guard. He was there. I cannot tell you how I knew. I never saw him. I was facing the wrong direction. But I felt the same feeling I had felt that day in May, the lights on. Someone waiting feeling, and it was being felt by someone in the parade. And the someone in the parade was the woman, and the boy was making her feel that. I almost dropped my rifle. I did not. Of course I did not. You do not drop your rifle. You die before you drop your rifle. But I felt my hand spasm on the grip, and I had to focus very hard on the back of the man in front of me for a long moment, on the buttons of his tunic, counting them, counting them, counting them, until the wave passed. She loved him. That was what I had felt. A mother's love for her child, moving across a parade ground full of bands and horses and history, and finding me, of all people, because I happened to be standing in its path. I cried that night. I do not cry. I have not cried since my father's funeral. I did not cry at the births of my own daughter, which is a thing I am not proud of but which is true. I did not cry when my best friend from the regiment was killed in a road accident 2 years ago. I have been a man who keeps tears inside the way you keep coins in a tight pocket, and even when the pocket is full, you do not let them fall out. But that night I cried. I cried for the woman in the car. I cried for the boy in the cap. I cried for Bertie Glass, who had been carrying his own version of this for 40 years without telling anyone. I cried for Hannah, who had married a man who could not say what was happening inside him. I cried for Pippa, who I had missed in a school play because I could not handle what was happening to me. I cried for myself. For all the years I had spent thinking I was a flat man, a simple man, a boots and bearskin man, when in fact I had been a man so full of other people's weather that I had not known where my own self ended and the world began. Hannah came into the kitchen and found me. She did not say anything. She sat down next to me. She put her arms around me. She held me while I made the kind of sounds I had not made since I was very young. After a while she said, very quietly, "Tell me." So I told her. I told her everything. The notebook, the dates, the car in the rain, the boy at the changing of the guard, the feeling at trooping, Bertie Glass and his tea and his hand on my shoulder, the 4 seasonal feelings I had been carrying for years without knowing what they were, the way they matched the household, the family, the calendar I had no right to be keeping. I expected her to laugh. I expected her to tell me I was overworked and needed leave. She did not. She listened. She listened the whole way through, without interrupting, without making faces, without giving me any sign of what she thought. When I had finished, she sat there for a long time with her hand on mine. Then she said, "My grandmother was like that." I looked at her. "My grandmother," she said, "on my father's side. She used to wake up at 4 in the morning sometimes, and she would know that someone she knew had died. Before the phone rang, before anyone told her, she just knew. My father said she did it her whole life. He said it was a curse and a gift at the same time." I had been married to Hannah for 9 years, and she had never told me this. "You never told me," I said. She smiled. It was a sad smile. "You never seemed like a man who would believe me," she said. "You seemed like a man who needed everything to be solid." I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed of every year I had been married to her without knowing this about her family. Ashamed of how many times I had probably brushed off things she half said, because I had not made her feel safe to say them all the way. I told her I was sorry. She shook her head. "Do not be sorry, Edwin, just keep telling me." And so I did. After that night, things changed at home. Hannah became a kind of partner in what was happening to me. She did not pretend to understand it any better than I did, but she stopped looking at me like I was a stranger when I came home quiet. She started asking, gently, what I had felt that day. And on the days I had felt something strong, she would sit with me on the back step and listen. We started to map it together. She had a calendar in the kitchen, one of the big paper ones with squares for each day. We started very privately to mark it, not with names, never with names, just with small symbols. A circle for the heavy days, a triangle for the restless days, a square for the days when something I could not quite describe had moved through me. The calendar started to look like a strange constellation. And as the summer wore on, we noticed that the pattern was not random. There were quiet weeks. There were busy weeks. There were weeks where almost every day had a symbol, and weeks where there were none at all. The busy weeks tended to be the weeks where the family was somewhere together. The quiet weeks tended to be the weeks when they were scattered, on holiday in private, away from one another. It was as if the household, when it gathered, produced a kind of weather, and the weather could travel, and I was a man with thin skin. I should tell you about the day at the park. Late July, a free afternoon. Hannah suggested we take Pippa to St. James's Park, partly because Pippa loved the pelicans, partly because Hannah wanted to see, I think, whether the park itself would do anything to me. We had never tested the close range outside of work. I went to work in my uniform and stood at my post, and that was that. I had never walked through the park as a private man, paying attention. It was a perfect day, blue sky, white clouds the shape of slow ideas. Pippa had her favorite yellow dress on. Hannah was in her summer hat. We bought ice cream from the cart near the bridge. We were walking along the path when I stopped. Hannah looked at me. "What is it?" I did not know how to answer. It was as if I had walked into a room full of music I could not hear. The pressure of it was on my chest. The air was thick with it. There were many of them. Many feelings, layered, overlapping, like several radios all playing different stations in the same room. I sat down on the nearest bench. Pippa was confused. She tugged at my hand and asked if I was sick. I told her I was fine. I told her I had just felt a little dizzy from the heat. Hannah told her to go and look at the ducks for a minute, and Pippa, being 6 and trusting, did. Hannah sat next to me. "They are very close," I said. "Who?" she said. "All of them," I said. "The whole house, or near enough." She looked toward the palace, although you cannot really see it from where we were. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "What do they feel like?" I tried to find the words. "They feel like a family," I said. "What do you mean?" "I mean they feel," I said, "the way any family feels. There is love, there is impatience, there is worry. Someone is angry about something small. Someone is trying not to cry. Someone is thinking about a person who is not in the room. They feel like a family, like our family in the car on the way to your sister's, just bigger, just louder, just more of it." Hannah looked at me a long time. Then she said, "Edwin, you sound like you love them." I did not know what to say to that. Because the truth was, sitting on that bench in St. James's Park with my daughter feeding ducks and my wife next to me, and a whole household humming through my chest like a hive of bees, I felt something I had not expected to feel. I felt protective of them. Not because they were royal, not because they were special, but because they were people. Because I had been carrying small pieces of their inner lives for months, and I had come to know them in a strange, one-sided way, the way you come to know the family in the house next door if you live next to them long enough, through small daily evidence, through the rhythm of their lights and their laughter and their slammed doors. I did love them, in a way I could not have explained to anyone, including myself, until that moment. That was a hard thing to sit with. I spent the next few days turning it over, trying to work out what to do with it. I had a job to do, a specific job. I was supposed to stand and protect and not interfere. Bertie Glass had told me as much. We are meant to stand. But what do you do when the standing becomes a kind of knowing? What do you do when the knowing becomes a kind of caring? What do you do when the caring becomes a thing that lives in your chest and follows you home and sits at your dinner table and watches you tuck your daughter into bed? I did not have an answer. I just kept going to work. I kept standing. I kept writing in the notebook. And summer wore on. In late August, I felt something that did not fit the pattern. A small bright spike of fear. It came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was off duty, in our flat, helping Pippa build a Lego castle on the rug. The feeling went through me so suddenly that I sat back on my heels, and Pippa looked at me with her serious 6-year-old face and asked if I was all right. I told her I was. But I was not. The fear was not mine. I knew that immediately. It was a borrowed fear, a transmitted one, sharp and specific and not quite finished. It had the texture of something has just nearly happened. The way you feel after you brake hard in the car and the moment passes and you sit there with your hands shaking on the wheel and your child in the back seat asking why you stopped. I went into the kitchen. Hannah was making tea. "Something just happened," I said. She turned, she read my face. "Where?" she said. "I don't know," I said. "Close. Somebody got a fright, a bad one. They are all right now, but it was close." She did not ask any more questions. She made me a cup of tea and put it in my hands. 2 days later, there was a small item in the paper, a traffic incident, a near miss involving a vehicle in the royal household. No one had been hurt. The driver had reacted quickly. The matter was being looked into. I read the item 3 times. I folded the paper carefully and put it on the counter. Hannah came in and saw my face. She did not need to ask. "It was that," I said. She nodded. I sat down at the table and I put my head in my hands. This was different. This was not feelings drifting on the air like pollen. This was real time. This was urgent. This was a person in actual danger, and I had felt it the moment it happened, and I had been in my flat with my daughter, doing nothing, knowing nothing, unable to help. I did not know what to do with that. I sat there for a long time, while Hannah moved quietly around me, and Pippa played in the next room, and the afternoon light made slow shapes on the kitchen floor. I thought about birdie glass. We are meant to stand. I thought about whether that was enough. I thought about whether, sometime, somewhere, the standing was going to ask more of me than I had ever signed up to give.